Let's come back. Let's come back for just a dip back in to continuity. One of the qualities of Erik H. Erikson was his companionship with his wife, Joan Erikson. Joan M. Erikson. And he died in his early 90s. And she, being somewhat younger, a little younger, lived on and published a retrospective remembering of their work together, because it really was a shared presence work together. The Life Cycle Completed, extended version with new chapters on the 9th stage of development by Joan M. Erikson. Erikson looked at the spectrum of lives for human beings, complex as we are, and found, as anyone acquainted with wisdom eventually discovers, disclosed in beholding, that there is not only a frame, it's not only a picture, there's not only a square, but that square, which I call a square of attention, to take it out of the frameability, to take it out of the picture, that square of attention, in terms of an electronic, integral, how it all comes together, however big a picture, however big a frame that you would like, or how complex what is being reframed, or even reframed, or even put into a continuity like so many frames per second, which gives you then moving pictures, which then you can expand so that you can have an ever larger camera, ever larger screen. You can have 70 millimeter Round the World in 80 Days by Mike Todd. Beyond that, the square of attention has a magneto complement, even in universal energy itself. The electromagnetic spectrum, and those equations, by the way, in Maxwell's treatise on such things, about 140 years ago now, solve both ways. They solve in a positive way and in a negative way. And they solve in such a way that there's not only an electromagnetic spectrum in the universe that is seeable, but the mathematics shows there is a magnetoelectric energy that solves in what seems by the frame of mathematics in terms of its standard accepted procedure to be a negative, and that magnetoelectric energy, current, dynamic, is about 1 billion times stronger than the electromagnetic index of energy. So that the universe coming out of a zero field fertility has not only an electromagnetic universe, but it has not separate from it, but woven into it in a very specific, balanced, symmetrical way. A magnetoelectric universe that is by far the bulk of what is real, is really the cosmos, as the wisdom tradition since Pythagoras, some 2,500 years ago, would express it. Misused all the time and continually and mostly. The first pre-Socratic philosopher to use it in a Pythagorean term was Empedocles. In a cosmic, his poem on the cosmos. And later on, Parmenides in his mystical poem on the way of Parmenides, the cosmos of Empedocles, the pre-Socratic Heraclitus, where all is flux. You can never step into the same stream twice. It's changed, it's different, etc., etc. Anaxagoras, one can go on, and one did go on. The quality of that square integrally in electromagnetic registry can have a double complement, most graphically by making a 90-degree tilt so that the square becomes a diamond. And, surprisingly not surprising, it can tilt 90 degrees left or right. And a magnetoelectric energy will have a chirality. And not just tilt, it will spiral. And it will spiral around the line, the linearity of the way in which an electric current in its polarity will send the negative particle, the electrons, in such a way that they can be conducted through copper wires, etc., fibers, etc., and voila, one has lights, electronic appliances, etc. The chirality is left-handed or right-handed, and in the universe, in the electromagnetic spectrum, right-handedness seems to be the issue. Whereas left-handedness is the problem. But it's chirality which is the resolution. If you take a square and you superimpose one of the diamonds on it, you get an eightfold structure. In India, it's called a mandala. 8. And if you do that in terms of a musical scale, you get an octave. If you do architecture, one has an octagon. When the mother of Jesus died at age 65 in Ephesus, as a commemoration for her, an octagonal building was built by not only the survivors, but the community that had taken root in the couple of years that it was being developed, and that octagonal memorial, burial building for her was on the major way of Ephesus that led from the port to all of the sacred shrine major events and so forth. And cutting spirally from that was a way that went to a different area of the very large city of Ephesus, where eventually a great church was built for Maria, for Mary, and it was assumed that that church was built for the Virgin Mary, and that assumption is peculiar when one knows the real history. That octagonal structure, when news of it was carried to the West, when it came to the attention of the rest of her family, the two of her sons, of the four brothers of Jesus, were there with her, and they're the ones that oversaw the building of the octagonal, Joseph and Simon. The other two sons, James the Just, and Jude, were still in Jerusalem. But the four daughters were in the west country of Britain, not England, but Britain, ancient Britain. And that lore was passed on, so when it came time for one of her daughters, Susanna, who had the only female daughter among all of the sisters' children, all the rest were boys, and she was given a family name. Her mother was Susanna, and one of her aunts was Joanna. Mary, the mother of Jesus, her mother was Hannah. So the daughter, Jesus' only niece, was called and named Anna. And Anna married the most powerful king of the West Britain. His name was King Mawr, M-A-W-R, like Bryn Mawr. Beli means good. The great good king. He was the king of Cornwall. Like where they were, which became Somerset, the king at that particular juncture was Avaragus. But when it came time to celebrate the triumph of 3 generations of incredible wisdom, tradition, great way women in the West Country, they built a shrine to the Virgin Mary, and they built it in octagonal form because they understood that this was the architectural prototype that was made in Ephesus by the great artist Mary Magdalene, who designed this structure, that this would be the 8-fold building structure to show this great octagonal, not only a square of attention, but its chirality to have the attentiveness of the meaning of the square of attention in its great chirality, where the integral diamond is in a deep complementarity with, so the square and the diamond, the integral and the differential, are brought together in a form that is a resolution, the 8-fold building, the 8-fold octave of sound, like the octave, the way in which the pairing of 4 pairs, like the ancient Egyptian gods always were in pairs, Osiris and Isis, and so forth, and beyond and within which a ninth was the sacred source of the eight. And so what is in and without is a field of the ninth. And so in A Life Cycle Completed, Joan M. Erickson bringing the ancient wisdom forth because her husband had concentrated on the octagonal, the octagon, the structure of human lives as we have come to understand them by the late 20th century. And she added chapters bringing in the ninth. And all of this was published originally in 1982 and put into a paperback in 1987. All of this is a quality that also has its effect as we are looking at it en grand vision in time forms of civilization. That the energy frequency has its crest and troughs symmetrical over a zero horizon dynamic of time within its real field of fertile nature, and that the energies of time have a way of going down to a trough and then curving back up to the horizon and going up as much above the horizon into a crest as it went below the horizon, so that the trough and the crest balance. They balance on the dynamic of the zero horizon hidden within the core of time. Euclid in his geometry, very Pythagorean. A locus is a point of no dimension. When it moves, it describes a line. And if we put a pair of beginnings and ends, the line is finite. If we start with a beginning and let the line continue, we have a segment of which we can make a frame, a square of attention, that looks at an angle of vision of not only the movement of that line, but within its four-part frame. A vertical and a horizontal, and 1/4 of it will be that 90-degree angle within that field. And whatever occurs within that, the segmenting of those two lines into lines having beginning and end, now one has a middle, which is a line, in fact two lines, which can be joined by a third, and you have a right-angled triangle. You can extend either the horizontal or the vertical line as much as you like, as long as you keep the ratio of that hypotenuse and those two vector frame coordinates. And within that quarter, within that angle of vision, one can develop geometry. Quite far. Not only geometry, but dynamic relationalities within it, a trigonometry. One can develop the way in which a cone of light, of seeing, is able to have conic sections. And all of this was explored completely in Alexandria, in Greek, Egyptian mathematics long before there was a codification of an empire church. It's still taught in high schools around the world. You can study geometry anywhere in the world. And those students who have studied geometry anywhere in the world can understand each other when they talk geometry or trigonometry or the development of a mathematics that has an algebraic, numerical valuation brought into conjunction, into interplay with it. Not only is mathematics international or even interstellar, it happens to be universal, but is not yet cosmic. For this, one needs to go beyond. In the time forms of civilization, and we'll come back to frame analysis, to reframing, to many other things in presentations to come. But now we want to look at the way in which time forms of civilization have a master cycle, which is best characterized as a carrier wave. What does it carry? It carries the time dimension of meaning for life, especially under the guidance and care and tutelage of dominant species, in our case on our planet, Homo sapiens sapiens. That responsibility has a carrier wave of dynamic that is not just the lifeblood, it is the dimensional dynamic by which a civilization matures, because that time form was originally pioneered by culture. It was pioneered by culture in tens of thousands of years of increasing access to a fifth dimension, a field of vision. So that even 40,000 years ago, a species that had been around for 160,000 years at least by that time, developed the capacity to work within that visionary dimension and produce a sixth dimension, which was the artist. One of the culminations, one of the apex of Paleolithic art is Lascaux. That the great ensemble of Lascaux was designed by a single architect of the real. There was no written language, he couldn't sign his name, but he put his signature on the heart side of the entrance to the cave complex of Lascaux. The first symbol that one sees on the left is the head and neck and mane of a black stallion. So I call him Black Stallion. And when you go down the main concourse of that dynamic of entering into and progressing forward, that movement, that timeline, which has illustrations on the left going all the way to what becomes the end, so that there's a geometry then that is able to be operative. There's a stalactite hanging down from the roof of the cave, obtruding itself, and there on that stalactite is another head mane and neck of a black stallion, where you turn chirally to the right, because that's the clockwise motion of the way in which an integral occurs, and one comes back, and there are paintings again, but they're different. On the left, one has the way in which animals which are hunted are arrayed, and when one comes back, one has all kinds of colors of horses. The French who first dealt with looking at Lascaux, the Abbé Bruel, and many of the early French spelunkers who went into Lascaux, they called them Chinese horses because they looked very much like Chinese art that was becoming popular and fancy at the time, because they're the kind of horses that one sees prized in the Tang Dynasty. They're the sturdy horses, not Clydesdales, but they're the sturdy kind of horses that used to be the prize and pride of military generals in the Tang Dynasty, because they're not only stable in battle, they are stamina in endurance, and they were the symbol of Tang Tai-tsung, who founded the Tang Dynasty. And he got that because he was told that the greatest conqueror before then was somebody from the far west. And in China, like in Egypt, the paradise was always in the far west. Not just west, the far west. Like for us, the chirality is the far east. Someone named Alexander the Great had a prize horse, a black stallion named Bucephalus, who was with him in all of his campaigns. He never lost a campaign, never lost a battle, and Bucephalus was always his steed. The archetype comes down. Every great knight has to have a horse. Sir Gawaine's horse is Gringolet. And the livery on Gringolet and on the shield, and for Sir Gawaine is the 5-pointed star, the pentacle, which is the dimension of visionary consciousness put into a star. So Tang Tai-tsung, Alexander the Great, but it goes back 20,000 years to Lascaux, where Black Stallion put in all the horses of his kind of visionary art, that these are also artists like me. They're like me. They're not made to hunt, but they're made to have this appreciation of the elegance and strength and stamina. And it would be a long time before they were tamed. And they would be tamed in Central Asia, in the great plains of Central Asia, around where Samarkand was. Because all the great caravan routes that went from Samarkand east all the way into China essentially used camels until the horse was tamed. And the taming of the horse around 2500 BC led to a great technological leap for them, because one could not only have horses to carry caravan routes far beyond the camels in terms of speed, but the protective quality, because one could pair horses together and make chariots. And with a chariot, it wasn't just that a great warrior knight would have his horse, but a chariot with a pair of horses. And one could even have a super chariot where he had a pair of pairs, 4 horses, like in Ben-Hur film. One could have the ability to literally be unapproachable in terms of military might and speed. A man with endurance can move 25, 30, even 35 miles in a day. You can even press yourself in a yoga. I once covered with a couple of high Dharma friends 50 miles in one day in the Sierras. You can do that. Then you have to rest for a while, many days. But with a horse, you can cover 50 miles quite easily in a day. You can have a whole ensemble. And if you have horses corralled in increments along the way, every 20 miles or so, like the Pony Express, one can send an armed force like Tang Tai Tsung did 2,000 or 3,000 miles west as rapidly as the horses could gallop. 1,300 years ago, 1,400 years ago, that was really something. It took about 600 years for the Mongols to breed their own wild horses and get their own horsemanship. And under Genghis Khan, they rode all the way west into France before they were stopped. What happens in Lascaux is that the whole concourse is interrupted by a side passage, which is the way in which there is, just as one is coming to the culmination of what would be the form of the 4 plus 4, the 8, the 8th goes off on a skew to the perpendicular, like in Lascaux, and there is a confrontation of identity that is put into the paintings, because one doesn't go very far, there's a pit. There's a fall off abruptly in that other passage in the cave, and it plunges down quite a ways, some 25, 30 feet. Those who were going through that initiation, that journey of understanding the mystery of how one completes the ambience to it, that one goes through the recycling, not through the framing, but through the whole mandala, that the 8th movement is a movement that is of a different nature and presents one with a threshold that is truly life-threatening. Your ankle is tied with a woven fiber rope, and you're told to jump into the darkness. You do not know that bungee style, you will not crash into the rocks below in the unseen darkness. But there will be a moment where you are stopped just short. And the torches will be brought, and you can see on that pit wall, that cave wall, the rhinoceros, the ancient rhinoceros, there in that part of France 20,000 years ago. And the stick figure of the man with a bird head. One has learned to fly as a man, as a human being, into dimensions and realms that were not available before for you, for anyone. and it has a sexual overtone because it's scared to death in a moment of crisis that is indistinguishable from elation. So that one in a regression can be caught into a search for death rather than a search for love. When that happens, when ensconced in that, as we find in late 2014, increasingly, the bastardization of everything that is life-giving becomes death-dealing. We're going to talk next week about two of the geniuses that occupy the via negativa trough of the current of the carrier wave of civilization. The one 1,500 years ago was his name given, nobody knew his real name, like Black Stallion. Dionysus the Areopagite, but in the way in which things are death-dealing, he's called Pseudo-Dionysus. It's the false deity. We don't know who he was, but he wasn't that. Well, but he was. And 2,000 years before him, before 500 AD, in 1500 AD, the Via Negativa was characterized by Queen Hatshepsut. This is Queen Hatshepsut. This is her mummy that was found and identified early in the 21st century. Her quality is that she was the female pharaoh, and though ritual said and prescribed that she must wear a false beard when she held pharaonic court, she was feminine through and through in her qualities, which was considered a negative by all of the structures of the empire that was set up. And she emphasized that new realms had a different take. And she is the one that pioneered the trade between Egypt and India. She's the first one to not only send a ship or some trading ships to India down the Red Sea and along the coasts of South Arabia and the coasts of what became Iran and Pakistan to the Indus civilization river. She sent 60 ships at a time. They built very large ships finally, ocean-going ships. And she's the one that transformed the entire economy of the ancient world. That it wasn't just caravan routes where you would have so many scores or even hundreds of camels or finally horses, but you had many, many scores of ships. So next week we'll take a look at the way in which the Via Negativa is not a negative, but is the trough part that has a complement in the crest Renaissance. And 1,000 years after the trough comes the crest of the Renaissance. Both times and before. There was an original time, and we'll look at that as well. More next week.